Hello wonderful people, it's Genevieve and my goal here on this channel is to teach you all about illustration and design. So if you're new, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss any of the weekly videos and so that you can join our wonderful creative community. Now today we're going to be drawing a magical deer, kind of glowing deer in a wintry forest, but you could totally customize this video and have, I don't know, a bunny in more of a spring forest. I'll give you tips on that as we go. Oh, and because it was so much fun last time, we're going to do one more illustration course giveaway in this video, so make sure you stay tuned for that. Now, just a quick note before we start, in this video I'm going to be working in an app called Procreate, which is on the iPad, but you can follow along with any digital art software of your choice. We're only going to be using maybe 1 or 2 brushes, very basic ones, and I'm going to do my best to give you alternatives if you are not working within Procreate of other tools or other brushes or other features that you may look for to recreate this effect. So the first thing we're going to do is a very simple, basic sketch of the animal we want to have in the piece. And as I mentioned in the intro, this is something you can completely customize. I'm going to draw a deer because I like the antlers and how they relate to the trees in the background, but you could go ahead and draw really whatever animal you want. And like I mentioned, the first step is going to be drawing a rough sketch of that animal. So if you want to have a deer, just follow along this video. We're going to draw the sketch together. But if you do want to have a different animal, I'm going to link in the description below a playlist with a bunch of other animal drawing tutorials I have, so you could go ahead and follow that tutorial right up to the end of the sketching phase essentially, and then coming back to this tutorial to draw the background together and then add the glowing effect on the animal itself. Otherwise, if you do want to have a deer, let's go ahead and sketch that real quick. So in terms of color here, obviously you can use whatever you want. It is a sketch. We're not going to see in the final result, so it doesn't matter at all. I like to just sketch with a neutral gray, so that's what I'm going to go with here. And same thing with the brush, as long as it is a brush that you're comfortable with, that would work totally fine. So if you're working with Procreate, that could mean, for example, going in the sketching pack that comes with the app, if I can find it, there we go right here, and picking the HB pencil. If you're working in a different software, again, whatever you're comfortable with, or something that has pencil in the name would be probably a good comparable brush to the HB pencil. Personally, in this video, I'm going to be using brushes from my inking, stippling, and texture bundle. These brushes are not essential at all. I want to make that very, very clear. But if you want to check them out, there will be a link in the description below, and there's always a special promo code for the YouTube people. So if you do have this pack, we're going to go ahead and pick the bonus sketching brush, which is at the very top of the list. From there, go ahead and create a new layer and rename that new layer to Sketch. And the goal with this sketch is not to draw something pretty, it is just to have a rough idea of where we're going to put the colors in the next stage. So don't worry if you have messy lines everywhere, that's totally okay. So I'm going to start with just one fairly big loose circle, which is going to be the front part of my deer, so the chest. And then right next to it, a slightly smaller circle, which is going to become the backside of the deer. From there, you can very easily connect them to create the belly and the back. And adding a little triangle on the backside to create the tail. And from there, we're going to use the shape of the body to help us draw the neck. So go ahead and take 2 fingers to measure the body, flip that around, and then draw a mark where your pinky was, which is going to help us place the head, which is also going to be a circle, this time quite a bit smaller than the 2 we have for the body. And from there, once more, we can just easily connect the different circles we have with lines, which this time is going to help us create the neck. For the back of the neck, I'm going to draw this kind of curvy line. And then the front of the neck is going to be a straight line instead. Now, right now, the head is very small and round, which is definitely not correct for a deer. So we're just going to extend it a little bit forward. So one flat line on the bottom, a slightly angled line like this for the front, and then once more connecting that to the circle. We're also going to draw the ears, which for now are going to be pretty much the exact same kind of triangle as the tail, both in terms of the shape and the size. So using your tail as a reference, you can very easily go back in and sketch the ears as well. Now from there, we're going to sketch the legs, which are just going to be a bunch of ovals. So we're going to start with the top of all 4 legs, which are going to be ovals, are going to be roughly the same size. So 2 vertical ones in the front, and then 2 slightly angled ones in the back. And then for the bottom part of the legs, we're just going to draw very long triangles. So again, 2 straight ones in the front and 2 slightly angled ones in the back. And if you want, you can add tiny little lines like this for the hooves. And the last thing we're going to sketch is the antlers. The antlers, in my case, I want them to be really big and kind of magical. But right now, I don't have a whole lot of space to draw them, so I'm just going to quickly use my arrow tool to resize and reposition my sketch. So feel free to do the same if you need to. And then I'm going to sketch the antlers really quickly. I'm not going to sketch necessarily the thickness, it's really just going to be the direction of the different branches of the antlers. So starting with just 2 vertical lines like this in the middle. And then this big angle shape on both sides. Making it flick slightly towards the inside, kind of like this. And adding a secondary little branch on the top section. And we're going to do pretty much the same shape, but a little bit shorter and a little bit higher. So again, this kind of weird crooked angle. This time with 2 secondary branches. So one on the outside that starts a little bit lower, and one on the inside that starts a little bit higher. Same thing on the other side, one on the outside that starts a little bit lower, and one on the inside that starts a little bit higher. And we're also going to add a secondary branch starting from the ones we just drew. So instead of starting from the middle, it's going to be on these brand new ones. And these are going to be almost semicircles, so kind of like this. And on the outside of those branches, we're going to draw very low secondary branches, or tertiary, I guess, by now. Then at the top, another one. And almost at the very end, another one to form this kind of Y shape. So feel free to pause the video here to take all the time you need to play around with your sketch. If you feel like some proportions are not exactly how you want them to be, you can always use any kind of selection tool you have, and then drawing a selection, for example, I don't know, around the whole head and antlers, and then just changing the proportions by changing the size of the different elements, rotating them as needed, really doing any kind of modification you need to have a basic structure you're happy with. It still doesn't need to look good, it's okay if you have lines everywhere, but it needs to be a strong enough structure so that in the next stage when we start adding the colors, you know where to put the colors. Awesome, so now that we have the basic structure, we can go ahead and add the colors, and we're going to start with the background. Usually I start with the actual character, but here the character is pale, almost white. So if we don't have a background that is dark, it's going to be very hard to see what we're going to do. So we're going to start with the background, which is going to be very fun, honestly, because it is quite simple. So the first thing we're going to do is set the background color. Now in Procreate, there's always a background color layer that comes within any canvas. So just go ahead and select that if you're working in Procreate. Otherwise, if you're working in different software, just go ahead and create a layer, put it at the very bottom of your layer list, and rename it to background. And in this tutorial, we're pretty much going to be working with a monochromatic palette, meaning we're going to pick one color to start with, and we're going to add some black, we're going to add some white, we're going to add some gray throughout the video to get the different shades and the different tints, but we're going to stick with the same base color itself. Now this color is something you can, again, customize. So in my case, I want something wintry, so I'm going to pick more of a blue, but you could go ahead with more of an orange if you wanted something that felt like fall or autumn, or you could go with a nice bright green if you want your illustration to feel more like spring. And since the deer is glowing, you could also pick maybe a purple and make the whole piece feel very magical and a bit mysterious. So feel free to experiment here, really pick whatever you want. If you want to follow along exactly with the same colors I will be picking, I will always add the X code right here on the top right whenever I'm picking a new color. And if you're working in Procreate, you can take that code and put it in the value section here in the hexadecimal little area. You can just input the code, it's going to give you my color. I'm personally going to pick a pretty basic primary blue. So not a blue that has too much green or too much purple in it, really something pretty true to blue. So kind of like this one that you can see here in the color palette. Now, as I mentioned, you can pick whatever color you want in terms of the hue, so purple, or green, orange, yellow, whatever you want, but make sure it is quite dark, otherwise it's going to be very hard to create the glow effect later. And then from there, we're going to start building the background itself, probably starting with the snow because it's just going to help us anchor the different elements. So go ahead and create a new layer, put it below the sketch but above any background layer you have, and rename that new layer to snow. If you're drawing something in a different season, you could rename that layer to grass or whatever you need. But we're going to go ahead and pick a lighter version of our background color. So go ahead and color pick it, and then just make it very, very bright and quite desaturated. And in terms of brushes, like I mentioned in the intro, I'm only going to use, well, 2 brushes in this video. One soft charcoal-y kind of brush, and then one precise sketching or outlines brush. So we're going to paint most of the things with the soft charcoal-y kind of brush. And so for that brush, you have a few different options. If you are working with Procreate, you could go ahead and find the charcoal pack that comes with Procreate. It is right here. And these options could all work, although I would say my favorite in that pack is probably the willow charcoal, so that's what I would recommend. Now, if you're working in different software, anything that has charcoal in name could probably work really well. The idea here is really just to have a bit of texture and softness in the brush. Like I mentioned though, I'm going to be working with the brushes from my inking, stippling, and texture bundle, and I'm going to pick from the inking pack the low ink marker. And we're going to set our brush to a medium to big size. Honestly, the exact size doesn't matter at all. Just something you're comfortable with in the sense that you're able to have control over the details and the direction of the brush. It's not too big, but something that is big enough so that you have some of the texture and the grit from the brush. And from there, we're just going to loosely paint the ground. So I'm going to go with something kind of curvy for my snow. And we're going to focus the ground in the lower third of the piece. So it doesn't need to be super exact, but as you can see, it's roughly the lower third. And here you really do not want to use any kind of color dropping option to fill in your shape. You want to fill it in manually so that you create that really nice soft texture. Now from there, we're going to add a bit of texture and depth in our ground. So we're just going to make our base color a little bit darker and a little bit more saturated. It should still be pretty light, but something dark enough to be able to create shadows, essentially. And we're going to paint some hills on our ground. So you may want to make your brush a little bit smaller for that. Still pretty big, but just so you're able to get a little bit more into details. And then you can draw a hill roughly in the middle of your ground. And then from that line, just kind of gently painting to create a gradient towards the back. The goal is not to have a perfectly smooth gradient at all, but it's just to blend in the line a little bit. And we're going to repeat this step to create another hill even further back, so just making your base color a little bit darker and a little bit more saturated. And then we're going to do the same thing, so just drawing another wonky line a little bit further back, and then gently brushing over that line to create the gradient. Now from there, once we have the ground mapped out, we're going to start painting the trees. And the first trees we're going to draw are going to be the exact same color as this back section, our ground. So you can just keep that color, keep the same brush, but we're going to create a new layer above the snow, but still below the sketch. And we're going to rename that new layer to Trees 1, because we're going to have a few different tree layers. Now once more here, you may want to go ahead and lower the brush size, just so you have something a little bit more precise. And the exact dimension is going to depend on your canvas size as well as the brush you're using, the software you're using, so a few different things. But you want something that is going to be precise enough to start drawing the branches of the tree. So something roughly this size. And then from there, we're going to draw some very simple trees. Now in my case, it is the winter, so I'm not going to have any leaves in the tree. But to make it a little bit more magical and spooky, even if it is not the winter in your piece, you may want not to draw leaves anyway. And I like to start by just drawing the trunk so I have a quick idea of the composition. And for trees 1, I'm just going to have essentially 2 trees, something very symmetrical, one on each side of the deer to help frame it a little bit. Just essentially drawing these 2 very wonky, curvy, flowy vertical lines. And from there, just adding some more wonky lines to create the branches. And for the branches, I would say less is more because we're going to have the antlers. We don't want to have too many branches, otherwise they're going to compete with each other a lot. So something very simple like this. You can see I have essentially 4 branches along the trunk, and each branch has only 2 or 3 secondary branches that are very, very soft and subtle. I'm just going to add the branches on the other side as well. Again, very, very simple, less is more. And actually, I might add some little extra branches poking out on the side, like there were 2 trees right outside of the frame, so we would just see the side branches. So maybe one here with a secondary branch, and maybe one like that. And same thing on this other side, maybe there's just one poking kind of like this. Now we're going to repeat this step a couple more times, adding trees that are getting progressively darker as they get further in the background. So creating a new layer once more, this time putting it below trees 1, but still above the snow. And renaming that layer trees 2. Now, like I said, we're going to get progressively darker as we get further back. So just picking your base color and making it darker. We don't want to make it more saturated though. So we're just going to lower the brightness right here. And same thing, I'm going to start by roughly mapping out the trunk so I have an idea of the composition before going in and spending time on the branches. So I think here I'm going to have one trunk here, maybe one on the very edge, and one here. And as you can see, I'm essentially using the trees to frame the deer. So I'm keeping the middle of the piece really open so that the main element that catches the eye here is going to be the antlers and the head of the deer, as opposed to a bunch of branches all tangled together. And then once I have my trunks roughly mapped out, same thing, I'm just going to come back in and add some branches, and here even fewer branches than before. So I would say maximum 3 branch per tree with maybe 2 or 3 secondary branch per branch. So let's talk a little bit about the giveaway while you're working on this. So as I mentioned in the intro, the prize for this week's giveaway is going to be lifetime access to my illustration course, Illustration from Scratch, which is, well, an illustration course in which I teach you all the basic things you need to know to start drawing your own illustrations. But we're covering topics like color theory, lighting, drawing characters, both the body, the face. We're also talking about things like perspective, composition, sketching, finding ideas. And this is a course that was built from, I would say, beginner to intermediate artist. And as usual on the channel, the way to enter the giveaway will be finding the secret password hidden somewhere later in the video. I'm not going to tell you exactly what it is just yet, but there's going to be a pop-up on the screen saying secret password, so it's pretty easy to find. And once you do find the secret password, just leave it in the comments below on this YouTube video and on Instagram. And to make it as fair as possible, even if you are already in my illustration course, if you do enter and you do win, I will just refund your purchase. So really everyone can enter. And it's been really prevalent in the last few weeks, so I'm going to mention it right in the video today. I do not have either Telegram or Nicegram. So if someone comments back on your YouTube comment saying you won the giveaway, message me on Nicegram or blah blah blah. Even if they have my profile picture, it is a scammer, so don't reply to them. I will announce the winners in my Instagram story, so not in the YouTube comments, especially to avoid those scammers. Now, all the rules and details like the entry dates and the closing dates and all those things are going to be in the video description, so make sure you go ahead and check that out and stay tuned for the secret password. And I feel like these trees might actually be a little bit too light, but it is not a problem because we drew them on a separate layer. It's going to be very easy to just come back in, make the color even darker if you want. By now you can see I'm really middle of the way in terms of the brightness. And then just drop my color onto the trees to recolor them and make them darker. So that is the beauty on drawing on separate layers. Not only you can move stuff around if you need to, but you can also recolor everything very, very easily. So we're going to repeat this step and create one last layer of tree, but this one is going to be very dark trees in the absolute background. So go ahead and create a new layer, put it below the snow, but above any background color layer you have, and rename that new layer to Trees 3. Here, go ahead and color pick the color you use for the background and make it really dark and desaturated. So probably middle of the way in terms of the saturation and almost completely dark. Otherwise, same thing, we're going to draw some very thin, skinny trunks first to help us visualize the composition. So I'm probably going to draw one here because there's a big gap. Maybe one here, and maybe another one right here. Then these trees, because they would be so far away, we wouldn't see a lot of detail. So what I recommend doing is adding the branches without any secondary branch. So really just keeping it as simple as possible. And I might add a little short one right here. Why not? Now, while we have this very dark version of base color, we're also going to add some bushes in the foreground. So go ahead and create a new layer above everything we have so far except for the sketch. And rename that new layer to Bushes. And here you could have kind of the cloud shape for the bushes. I'm personally going to go with long ovals, kind of like this. And we don't want those to be super precise or detailed. We just want to use them to help frame the piece, because otherwise it is really bright at the bottom and really dark at the top. And so by adding some darkness on the bottom corner, we're going to help the eye focus towards the middle of the piece, which is where the main element is going to be. So honestly, something super simple like this is plenty. Now from there, we're also going to add some very simple, super rough evergreen silhouettes in the background to make the sky feel a little bit less flat. So go ahead and create a new layer, put it below everything you have except for the very background layer itself, so below all the trees, and rename that new layer to Evergreens. Now these evergreens, we want them to be slightly lighter than the sky itself, so you can just color pick the sky color and make it a little bit brighter. So probably something like this. And here you can simply come in with a big version of your brush and just draw these huge triangles in the back. Now, while we have this color, we're going to create a vignette effect around the piece. So go ahead and create a layer, this time above every single thing you have in your piece, including the sketch, and rename that new layer to Vignette. And from there, you can quickly draw a very rough circle around the deer like this, and quickly fill in the sides. And right now it does look like it's just a weird blue frame. So to create the actual vignette effect, we're going to use a blending mode, which is going to take that layer, take that blue or that base color, whatever it is for you, and change it based on the colors that are below it. Blending modes are available in pretty much every single digital art software I've ever looked at, and usually it is with the opacity of your layers. So in Procreate, very easy to find. You just tap on the little N next to the check mark, and you're going to have the opacity slider as well as this list, which is the blending modes. And here, feel free to go ahead and just scroll through the list and see what the different blending modes do. I know I'm personally going to use multiply, which is at the very top of the list, but feel free to go with a different one if you find one that you'd rather use. Now this is getting closer to a vignette effect, but it is not quite there. So what we're going to do is we're going to blend this edge to create a bit more of a gradient. And you have a few different methods to do that. The one I would recommend is using any kind of smudge tool you have, which again is something you can find in most software. Usually it is a little finger icon kind of like this. And setting that smudge tool to whatever brush has texture in it. Honestly, the exact brush doesn't matter at all because the smudge tool essentially is just going to blend your colors around, so it is not that important. Just make sure you have a brush that has a bit of texture in it, and honestly that should work perfectly fine. Now if you're working with Procreate, the brush I personally like to use a lot for my smudge tool is a free brush that comes with the app. It is in the painting pack and it is called the Stucco brush. So you're gonna have to scroll through to find it. It's at the bottom here, Stucco, there you go. And then with a small to medium brush, again, the exact size doesn't matter at all, but you're just gonna go over and blend in the edge until you have a bit of a softer gradient for your vignette. And there's really no right or wrong way to do this here. As long as you have something that looks good to you, that's really all that matters. And once you have your vignette, you might notice the colors are not exactly what you want them to be, but again, since we drew everything on separate layers, it's really easy to go back and change them. For example, I feel like my evergreens might actually be a little bit too bright, too light. I want them to be a bit darker. So I'm just gonna go ahead, color pick them, although I know that's still the color I'm using, but I'm gonna color pick them still. Make that color a little bit darker, and then just change the color of my evergreen by dropping the color on top. And the last thing we're going to do for the background is adding some falling elements. So in my case, I'm going to add some snow because it is winter, but if you're working in a different season, you can totally adapt that to be, I don't know, falling leaves in the fall. You could have cherry blossom petals kind of blowing in the wind if you're working in the spring. So again, that is something that is very easily customizable, but I would really recommend you go ahead and have something floating in the sky. It's going to make the piece feel a lot more magical. So go ahead and create a new layer, putting it above any kind of trees you have, but below any bushes you have. And rename that new layer to whatever floating or falling element you have. So in my case, I'm just going to rename it to snowflakes. And here the color you use is going to depend on the element, of course. In my case, I have snowflakes, so I'm just going to color pick the color of the snow that I have here, pretty much in the middle of my ground. And with the same brush, but quite a bit smaller, I'm just going to go ahead and manually draw in a few little snowflakes. And to help create this magical effect and emphasize the depth, we're also going to create another version of that layer, but this time above everything we have so far, so even above the vignette. And here, honestly, you can rename that new layer to the exact same thing because we're going to remember it's not that big of a deal. So in my case, I'm going to rename it to snowflakes. And here you're going to draw the exact same elements you drew in the background, but you're going to make them a little bit bigger and you're going to keep them very sparse. So just a few of them, mostly focusing them on the sides. And to make them look like they're close to us, we're going to essentially make them look like they're out of focus by adding some blur. And here you can really use whatever blur option is available in your software. Quite often you're going to be able to find something that is called Gaussian blur, but again, any blur would work perfectly fine here. In Procreate, you can open up the adjustment panel here at the top, and you're going to see Gaussian blur in this second section of the menu. So you can just select that, and then by swiping your finger towards the right, you can add blur. And towards the left, you can reduce the blur. So here, I'm going to go with not a whole lot of blur, probably around 10%. But as you can see, just by adding the blur, it makes the piece feel a lot deeper. So feel free to pause the video to take all the time you need to play with your background, whether it is moving stuff around or changing the colors. And once you're done, we're going to meet up in the next chapter, which is going to be drawing the animal. Great, so at this stage, we're ready to start drawing the animal itself, which honestly is going to be very, very easy because it's going to be a bright silhouette with some glowing effects, which are very, very simple. So we're going to start with the silhouette itself. So go ahead and create a new layer. And this one, we're going to put it below anything you have in the foreground, but above everything you have in the middle ground and background. So in my case, that means above the trees, above these snowflakes, but behind the bushes. In this layer, we're going to rename it to whatever name your animal is. So in my case, I have a deer. So I'm just going to rename it to deer. And here in terms of color, you're just going to go ahead and look at your piece and see what the brightest color is and color pick that. So in my case, it is right here in this section of the snow. So I'm just going to go ahead and color pick that. And then with the same exact brush, but probably quite a bit smaller because we have a lot of details in our animal, we're just going to draw this silhouette. Now, if you want, you could totally go ahead and keep the sketch like it is right now, but if you maybe want to visualize everything a little bit better in terms of what you're drawing underneath, it might be helpful to apply the sketch layer as a blending mode, just like we did for the vignette. So again, just opening whatever opacity option you have in your software and Procreate, tapping on the little N next to the check mark. And here we're actually going to pick the same blending mode I use for my vignette, so multiply right here at the top, which is essentially going to make these sketch lines really quite dark, but we're going to be able to see what we're drawing underneath quite a bit better. So feel free to do that if that helps. Otherwise, we're going to make sure we are on our animal layer. That's where we want to draw, not on the sketch layer. And we're going to create the silhouette using these sketch lines that we have. So at this stage, we're not creating anything new. We're really just following the basic lines that are already there. So it should be fairly easy. And with that, it is time for the secret password. So if you've watched this far in the video, please go ahead and leave me a comment telling me which animal you're drawing. Because again, it could be a deer, but it could be something completely different. And if you're new on the channel, you might be a little bit confused with the secret password thing. Essentially, it's a game that we play here. In all of my long form illustration tutorials, I hide a secret password for you to find, which does a few things. When there is a giveaway like today, it is your way to enter the giveaway. But even more than that, believe it or not, it does give me a lot of insight into how to edit and pace my videos better, which helps me create better tutorials for you. So again, if you've watched this far, just leave me a comment below telling me which animal you're drawing, and then we're going to keep going. And once you feel like you have everything mapped out, go ahead and hide the sketch layer just to double check that everything is indeed there and it looks good. For example, I'm just going to go back in and refine the legs and the tail a tiny little bit. And I might fine tune the antlers a little bit as well, mostly just in terms of the thickness. Now to create the glowing effect, we're going to duplicate our animal layer that we have. In Procreate, to duplicate a layer, it's very easy. You just swipe it towards the left with one finger and then you select duplicate. And we're going to pick the bottom copy that we just created and we're going to rename it to glow. And we're going to create the glow by applying a blur just like we did on the snowflakes. So again, whatever blur feature you have in your software is going to work here. If you're working with Procreate, I recommend going in the adjustment panel and picking Gaussian blur once more. And same thing, we're just going to add blur by swiping your finger towards the right to add the blur or towards the left to reduce the blur. Now here, the amount of blur you're going to add is totally up to you. I'm probably going to go around 30%. Now if you want, you can totally keep it like it is. It already looks like the animal is glowing. But if you want to amp the effect up a little bit, you could apply a blending mode to this glow layer. And here there's a bunch of different ones that you can use depending on the effect you want. So feel free to just scroll through the list until you find something that looks good to you. I think I'm personally going to go with color dodge, but I'm going to lower the opacity of the layer a little bit, probably around, let's go with 80%. Now we're going to refine the animal itself because right now it just looks like the animal was made of paper or something. It looks really flat, although bright and glowing. So we're going to create a new layer above the base we have. So in my case, above the deer, but in your case, it might be named differently. And we're going to rename that new layer to highlights. And to make sure these highlights really glow, we're going to also use a blending mode. So just again, opening your opacity section. And here, feel free to scroll through the list as well, again, if you want, but I would recommend using the blending mode. Add is going to be very bright. It's going to look like very intense lights. And because it is so intense, you may want to just set the opacity to roughly 50% for now. And here, make sure your brush is small enough so you can go back in and draw details. And you're just going to reinforce the edges of your animal. You can also draw little strokes to make it look a little bit more like hair if you want. And by doing that, it's going to help us make the animal look like it's glowing even more, but it's also going to help us define the animal. So if you feel like there's any element that is missing on the animal, like for example, I feel like the cheek of my deer should be a little bit more defined, you can go back in and with that color, just essentially outline it really quickly and easily. Otherwise, again, you're just going to go around the entire outside edges of your animal and pretty much just drawing these very bright outlines. Now I'm going to come in the next stage and add a black eye and a black nose, but I want those to really pop. So I'm going to, for now, add the highlight color behind them so that I can have maximum contrast later. If you are enjoying this tutorial, please consider helping me and the channel out by giving the video a like and subscribing to the channel if you haven't already. I know everyone on YouTube is asking you to do that, but believe it or not, it really does make a big difference for us. So thank you for helping. And if the animal you're drawing is fluffy, if it has fur, you can also use that bright color to add little fur details. So just little strokes in groups of, I would say, between 1 and 3. You definitely do not want to overdo it, but that can help bring the piece to the next level. Now, if like me, your animal is pretty much the exact same color as the ground, you might have an area where the animal is getting lost in the ground. There's not enough contrast. So if that's the case, we're going to very quickly add a bit of a gradient, I guess, towards the bottom of the animal to help it pop from the background. And we're also going to use that as an excuse to add a bit more volume to the animal itself. So we're not shading the animal per se, but we're just going to make it pop a little bit more. So go ahead and create a new layer below the highlights, but above your animal base. And although we are not shading per se, we're still going to rename that new layer to shadows. And here, go ahead and pick a darker, more saturated version of your base animal color. So probably middle of the way in terms of saturation, and I would say a third of the way in terms of brightness. And to make it easier, we're going to use what is called a clipping mask to help us stay within the base shape that we already have. And clipping masks are very common, so they should be in your software as well. If you're not sure where, just Google whatever name software you're using and clipping mask, and you should find the answer really easily. If you're working in Procreate, it is really easy. You just tap on the layer you want to apply as a clipping mask and then pick clipping mask from the menu right here. And you're going to see this little arrow appear, which means now whatever we draw on this layer is going to stay within the base shape we have. So that means we can very quickly come in and brush our shadows. Now, like I said, I'm going to add some on the legs because the legs in my case are blending too much with the background for my liking. So feel free to do that if you have the same problem as I do. Otherwise, we're going to use that shadow layer and effect to help different elements pop from each other. So for example, here, I'm just going to add a little bit at the base of the tail to help separate it from the back. I'm going to add a little bit below the head as well, just on the neck. Super simple, but again, to help it pop a little bit. Same thing, I'm going to add a little bit behind the head on the ear, just to help separate it. And I might add some on parts of the antlers, so probably these huge branches, I'm just going to shade them a little bit as well. So as you can see, it takes just 30 seconds to do, but it really helps the animal pop quite a lot. Now to make the animal pop even more, we're going to add some black details, mostly the nose and the eyes. So just go ahead and create a new layer above everything you have so far in terms of the animal. So above the base, the shadows, and the highlights. And rename that new layer to Animal Details. And from there, just zoom onto your animal's face, pick almost pure black. A really dark charcoal is what I would recommend here. Here, because I want a little bit more precision, I'm actually going to switch to a different brush, so more of a pencil brush than charcoal. If you're working with free Procreate brushes, that would mean going in the sketching pack that comes with the app, picking HB Pencil. If you're working in different software, anything that has pencil in the name should probably work really well. You want essentially something that has texture to it, but is going to allow us to have a bit more precision than a charcoal brush. If you are working with my inking, stippling, and texture bundle, we're going to pick the bonus sketching brush here at the top of the list. And we're just going to use that to create the facial features. Now here you can really have whatever facial features you want. I'm going to just draw this very simple U shape for the eye to make my animal look super peaceful. And then I'm going to draw this little oval for the nose, with a tiny vertical line in the middle. And the last thing we're going to do to make the piece feel really magical is add some little swirls of light around the animal. But before that, we're going to organize our file a little bit because we're starting to have a lot of layers. So everything that is relating to the animal, so from the animal's detail, the highlights, the shadows, the base, as well as the glow, we're going to group all of that within one, group. So go ahead and select all the layers that are relating to the animal. Just like multiple layers in Procreate, you can just swipe them towards the right with one finger. And then select the group option to group those layers. And then you can just go ahead and rename that group to whatever your animal is. So in my case, deer. And then from there, above everything we have in this group, even the details, we're going to go ahead and create our final layer. And this layer we can rename to magical lights. Now for this magical lights, we're going to use the same blending mode that we used for the glow. So in my case, it was color dodge, but it might be different for you. And for the color here, just go ahead and color pick in the glow area. So in my case, I'm going to get this teal here, but it might be completely different to you. And if you're working in different software than Procreate, just go back to the brush you've been using for most of the piece. So a charcoal brush or a brush with a soft texture, and that's going to work perfectly fine. But if you are working with Procreate, we're going to pick a brush that has a bit of that magical effect already within it. It is a free brush, so might as well use it. And it is in the Elements pack, so roughly towards the bottom of the list. Right here, and mine are in French. I don't know why. Sorry about that. But I think it should be the second brush for you, and it is the Flames brush. And here, honestly, probably going with a medium to big size. You can totally test, and it's going to depend on the pressure opacity. But we're just going to use that brush to gently add some magical elements around the animal. Now that brush is really quite intense, especially when combined with a blending mode. So you may want to go ahead and lower the opacity of it, probably around, I don't know, between 30 and 50%. Honestly, you can experiment. I'm going to go with 40. And then we're just going to draw these magical, very wispy little lights around the animal. There's really no right or wrong way to do this here. You just want to add a bit of that magical wispiness to the piece. Really, the goal is just to add a little bit of extra magic to the piece. Now I do feel like mine might be a little bit too intense, so I'm just going to go back in and play with the opacity of my layer, and I'm just going to set it around 50%. Now if you want to learn how to animate falling snow in your piece, I highly recommend you check out this video because I'm going to show you exactly how you can do it. It is really quite easy. But before you leave, make sure to give this video a like and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any of the weekly videos I post every Tuesday and Saturday. Then click on the link right here and I'll meet you there.